That's what you mean.
So what do you do? You're listening to something like the position cross midnight. It's just not intense.
Greetings to everyone. Hope all of you are well on this lovely Saturday. It's a different day for the AO readings now that I've got shit during the week, not to mention work, but also the new show with Sunday called In the Fold, where we do newsy shit, which has been going really well, having a fun time with it. The weekend has become the time for me to do Anti-Oedipus because it's just AO readings. It's real tough, but it takes a lot out of you. Because this is not an easy read. To put it lightly, it's not an easy read. And I know we're probably have fewer people in the Discord today, but that's fine as well. Grateful to all who join, and we're going to try to see if I can figure out a way to do it on Tuesdays still, but, you know, life gets away from you as it does. But we should jump to the reading. Last week, we spent an extraordinary amount of time. We're on page 308 of Anti-Oedipus. We spent a just kind of silly amount of time, actually, on really this paragraph and the one following it. Andre Green, and then the paragraph that involved Archie Bunker, as we learned to not quite Archie Bunker. But at its base, I said we'd go back over this because we kind of have to talk about a handful of things before we make our way into the next paragraph where we start getting into Lacan, and that is its own. Inside of Anti-Oedipus, the chapter we're in on schizoanalysis, as we start working our way through the critique, the final bits of critique through psychoanalysis, these last bits are their critique as they're laying out. And again, they're not doing so destructively or deconstructively, but instead trying to show where their critique really grows. The lines they have in here, and there's a handful that I think are really important to sort of talk about. It's a lot of flowery language, certainly. The earth is dead, the desert growing, the old father dead, the old territorial father, and the son too, the despot Oedipus. This is obviously callbacks a bit to Nietzsche, not just in the God is dead, old father is dead, not just in the desert's growing, and thus spoke Zarathustra, which is very that. They're calling back to this way that we are stuck within Oedipus and how Oedipus kind of, again, forms the conditions for its own existence. The next sentence, they say, we are alone with our bad conscience and our boredom, our life where nothing happens, nothing left but images that revolve within the infinite subjective representation. The subjective representation is the key to this, the symbolic. They're going to be continuing the critique of this in the next paragraph, so I'm like putting a pen on it for everyone. But the thing that happens as people don't believe, but they believe, we will muster all our strength so as to believe in these images from the depths of structure that governs our relationships with them and our identifications as so many effects of a symbolic signifier, the good identification, which you see a lot of these days, a lot of good identities. That thing that happens that puts us in the position of, as they use, it's not in the French, but Archie Bunker at the theater shouting before Oedipus, there's my kind of guy, that's my kind of guy. It's not so much that we believe in Oedipus. It's that we're attracted to Oedipus. We're aroused by Oedipus. That's my kind of guy. That thing that he's doing, that thing that Oedipus does, that structure that it builds, that attraction, this is the place that we find ourselves in, that theater of representation, screaming and yelling at the screen. That's my kind of guy. And the critique they're levying is, as we make that turn, how is it we get someone to not be screaming at that theater? Because it's not just as simple as making the move and saying, oh, I'm completely down with not having representation, and then like thumbs up and off you go. That's not really the jam. There's a lot more here, because how psychoanalysis, and not just psychoanalysis, but how critical thought often, psychoanalytic, psychiatric, I would even say pop culture thought at this point, because it's so built into everything we do. The place we end up with, the phrasing they have, in truth, they don't know what they're doing, nor what mechanism of repression they are fostering, for their intentions are often progressive. But no one today can enter an analyst's consulting room without at least being aware that everything has been played out in advance. When you enter, and this is general therapy too, this is again, everything these days. I don't even think it's purely psychoanalysis, but they're for sure in that space. No one today can enter an analyst's consulting room without being aware that everything's played out in advance, that these things are set up, that the relationships and the power structures that are going to be presumed in you. There is Oedipus in castration. There is the imaginary and symbolic. There is the great lesson of the inadequacy of being or of dispossession. This is psychoanalysis as a gadget, Oedipus as reterritorialization, a retimbering of the modern man on the rock of castration. And that's the last bit, that at the end of the day, whatever's going on, Oedipus is making its way sort of back to structured territorialities, that desire in its chaos, the chaos of desire, is being nicely folded into that triangle consistently. And not just that triangle, many of them, but that structure. That's my kind of guy. That's the play overall, if that makes sense. Hope it does a little bit. For the most part. And so as we move to the next paragraph, this is the hard critique of Lacan. I'm not here to teach Lacan, nor would I presume to be able to. Lacan's a beast of a read. You can start with anything. I tend to recommend grabbing a Seminar on Anxiety, some of the stuff that like doesn't sound as sexy, because Lacan is necessarily difficult, and until you get how he functions or how he talks or what kind of structures he's playing with, it's hard to go right at castration. It's hard to go right at how he sees the symbolic or the imaginary, because you'll get a fucked up understanding that way. I did. It works. If you're really wanting to dive in lightly to Lacan and not wanting to read him directly, Zizek's Everything You Wanted to Know About Lacan But Were Afraid to Ask Hitchcock. Strike that, flip it. Maybe not. I can never remember which one is which, but it is probably the best book on Lacan for like an intro level thing, if that makes sense. So, we'll give it another shot and we'll make our way through the next paragraph unless anyone's got a thing they want to mention and discuss. Excellent. And again, this is the opposition to Freud. This is they've been going through Freud and Oedipus, the very traditional psychoanalytic, and now Lacan, who at the time they wrote this was fairly cutting edge. Like if you think of Deleuze as being the cool cutting edge guy now, Lacan was way more cutting edge at the time. It was like less than 10 years. It's massive. He's a huge deal. He's a fucking huge deal everywhere. The path marked out by Lacan led in a completely different direction. He's not content to turn like the analytic squirrel inside the wheel of the imaginary and symbolic. He refuses to be caught up in the Oedipal imaginary and the Oedipalizing structure, the imaginary identity of persons and the structural unity of machines, everywhere knocking against the impasses of a molar representation that the family closes round itself. What is the use of going from the imaginary dual order to the symbolic third or fourth if the latter is biunivocalizing where the first is biunivocalized? As partial objects, the desiring machines undergo two totalizations. One when the socius confers on them a structural unity under a symbolic signifier acting as absence and lack in the aggregate of departure. The other when the family imposes on them a personal unity with imaginary signifieds that distribute, that vacuolize lack in an aggregate of destination. A double abduction of the orphan machines, inasmuch as the structure applies its articulation to them, inasmuch as the parents lay their fingers on them. To trace back from images to the structure would have little significance, and would not rescue us from representation, if the structure did not have a reverse side that is like the real production of desire. They're already introducing their critique pretty much hard in here. There's a couple really, really great lines that I want to make sure we touch on. If you were here when we went through The Body Without Organs, Daniel Smith wrote a fantastic piece sort of going around how the body without organs came to be, why it's important, and how it functions. But there's a very specific line in here: the imaginary identity of persons and the structural unity of machines. This is the line that they're really wanting to tarry with and spend time with. It's throughout the entire book, but this is, Daniel Smith focuses on this because this is the introduction of the BWO that finds a way to not have, it's one or the other, or one transforms into the other, but instead the simultaneity of both. So just giving that note. So for here, we're talking about Lacanian psychoanalysis and the nature of sort of how Lacan sees the structuration of desire, how he sees it sort of come about. The Borromean, again, I could go in depth into a million things. The very short version, I think, is said very nicely at the end here. They actually go into it as partial objects, which Lacan has in there. The desiring machines undergo two totalizations. So they're trying to describe Lacanian psychoanalysis actually through their own ontology. So we have desiring machines again at the very base of it, and they're totalized in two ways. The first is when you have the socius, the large-scale big other, that confers on them a structural unity under a master signifier, a symbolic signifier at the very top, acting as absence and lack in aggregate of departure. This is effectively the master signifier in the chain of signification. The other, when the family imposes on them personal unity with imaginary signifieds that distribute, vacuolize lack in an aggregate of destination, the nature of the mirror stage and the movement there. the way they're seeing it, and the way this is straight up out of Guattari, the way that Guattari is critiquing Lacan here is saying you're totalizing the process. That what's really important is that, well, you're seeing these things. It's like, hey, we've got this large, big thing, the big other, the master signifier that all other meaning is sort of derived from. You're missing how it's functioning. Instead, you're totalizing it by saying we have the socius that confers on them a structural unity. On the other side, instead of just the mirror stage, which is a totalization of that process that sort of imposes on the family, this personal unity with imaginary signifieds that distribute lack. This double play is where Lacan is taking desiring production and mistaking results that are happening during it, or the way things seem to look, the negative image of desire, and pushing it all the way through. And again, totalizing is the phrase they use here. It's very solid wording. And this they phrase as a double abduction of orphan machines. Orphan machines are desiring machines without sort of that, how to put it? Desiring machines don't have family. So you're abducting these orphan machines. And as much as the structure applies to its articulation to them, and as much as their parents lay their finger on them, they're not that. So it's totalizing them, tracing back images to the structure. You wouldn't be able to do this because we can. This is Lacan's. A lot of his work is about tracing images back to the structure, and we can do it constantly. Zizek, we can do this a lot. Zizek does this a lot, and we are able to find and make sense of that. But that wouldn't matter if, and it's the last line, if the structure itself didn't have a reverse side that was the real production of desire. That if desire and the pulsating nature of desiring machines and the connections and what they're producing wasn't actually there, you wouldn't even be able to have the reverse side where you totalize it. That's their argument. It's a fairly good one. It's, hey, look, the imaginary and everything you're talking about, all that stuff that you're going into town on, good for you, but it necessitates this other side. It necessitates the other side. It necessitates the other side. And that's kind of the brunt for them is, again, desiring production, desiring machines, how it works, and getting it back into that sort of space.
Yeah, because like early on when we read that, we said that the desire or desire machines is kind of like, you cannot, like, it's a break, right? It's kind of, it flows, and these flows, even if it's break, right? It's still
when it's breaking is still working.
Yeah, it's still going on.
Yes.
Right. But these I mean, Lacan kind of like, implying a structuration that is like contingent, and at the same time it's kind of like I don't know, the symbolization imaginary, he's still stuck in this totalizing framework, and there's a bit wording here, because the molar function, right? So these psychoanalysts, they didn't get out from one molar function, they still staying, right, in the molar function that they are, right? And they think that they kind of like, how can I say it? They think that they kind of like discovered desire as it is, but bottom, at the bottom, well, yeah.
No, and it's at the beginning there, they have the line, it might be a better word to use here is the analytic hamster inside a wheel of imaginary and symbolic, because that's actually the image they're conjuring in the French version. And again, at the time, because we're talking about them being stuck inside of that, unable to move outside of the imaginary and symbolic. They're playing inside of that. But these things are not themselves, as we talked about in the previous paragraph. These aren't really the machines that are the totality. These are, again, larger structures we're still stuck within. And that's the drive they keep pushing through. Psychoanalysis is about this overall complexity, the structures, the way that these things work, and the way all these things sort of set up. And as you make your way through, that's the critique they have here. And it's like someone in chat said, by univocalized is a fucking hell of a word. But when with Lacan, and I'll try not to use the word by univocalized. It's an excellent word for what it is, but it is a lot. What's the use of going from imaginary dual order to the symbolic third order if the latter is a one-to-one connection, but the first was a one-to-one as well? Their argument being that if you have everything crushed in, and if the first thing is a one-to-one connection, two wires touching by univocalized, if it's that already, then why would you need 4 more steps to continue the biunivocalization? It's not like you're making it simpler. It's not like you're finding a new way to interpret it. It was always one-to-one connection for Lacan, and it still is. So what the fuck? Why? That's because their argument again is desiring machines. The other side is not biunivocal. It's polyvocal. It's necessarily millions of connections, and we grab one. That's what biunivocalization is, grabbing the one connections. One-to-one correspondence is biunivocalized. One-to-one correspondence. Two things corresponding, biunivocal. Yeah.
And it's narrowing down the real by doing that, right? Like it's kind of like, how can I say it? It's kind of like making these partial objects, like these kind of like things that are symbolized, right? And
if we're using real in the way Lacan's talking about it, then yeah, it's limiting the symbolic and the imaginary to being basically a biunivocalized connection between the two of them. And even if we keep chasing it, and it's the way we talk about a symbolic chain, for example, the symbolic order is a series of biunivocal connections. That's how Lacan talks about it. It's, thing connected to thing connected to thing, one to one to one to one to one to one to one, all the way to the master signifier, which is like, wait, what, why would we do that? What is the use of going from the dual order to the symbolic third order or fourth order? Baromean not shit. Lacan's complex as hell. If the latter is biunivocalized, whereas the first is biunivocalized. Like, what's the point of doing this? But that's because ultimately what we're doing is we're taking partial objects and we're crushing them. We're putting them in two totalizations. The first is the socius, the master signifier, and the second is that of the lack, the mirror stage, and the personal identity. And by crushing everything into these two, it's the master signifier and the own identity, lack, things like that, that puts it in this weird biunivocal connection. And this is where, again, their critique ultimately is to say, this is all, again, that symbolic layer of how we're looking at it. When you flip the whole thing, you're going to find it's not biunivocal, it's polyvocal. It's desiring production in mass, the ringling mass of movement and vitality, ultimately.
Interesting.
It's a really interesting. It is. I think it's interesting. It's one of those really interesting passages because, again, Lacan. I used to shit on I used to make a lot of jokes during our first 2 readings of this, where I would just shit on Lacan, and I didn't let everyone know that I own every Lacan text you can possibly own in English and every Zizek text on him. And I have just a silly number of books about Lacan because I really dove into it and I really appreciate a lot of his work. It's incredibly complicated and I don't pretend to have a grasp of it. I pretend better to have a grasp of Deleuze, but I don't pretend for Lacan. It's far more complicated. But he does this thing and it's really tough that as you study it, and this is where I found myself ultimately falling back into Deleuze and Guattari, I shouldn't say back, falling forward into them, I guess, is when someone sat me down and explained what this critique means. And it was like, oh, fuck, it's a really good critique. It's a really fucking good critique. And that's the thing that they're going to be getting into in the next paragraph. I'll leave it open for a moment to see if there's any questions, because of course I want all of them. If you've got any, anyone from YouTube as well, feel free to send all the questions out. I'll take a second. I always take an awkward silence. See if anyone's got a thing. Excellent. To continue. This reverse side is the real inorganization of the molecular elements. Partial objects that enter into indirect syntheses or interactions, since they are not partial in the sense of extensive parts, but rather partial, like the intensities under which a unit of matter always fills space in varying degree. The eye, the mouth, the anus as degrees of matter. As a note, just before we go, I'm going to reread that. In English, this is a lot more difficult because we don't actually separate out the words. It's an intonation and sentence thing. But if I were to say, oh, that's, if I were to cut this can in half and say it's a partial can. But if I were to say, oh, I'm partial to pizza. It's partial to the bottom half. Partial. The partial versus partiel is a completely different beast. It's completely different. English makes this tough. It's one of the many. We have a really fascinating language, but we lack a lot of the nuance, to say the least. So it's that. So just to say again, since they are not partial in the sense of extensive parts, but rather partial, like the intensities under which a unit of matter always fills space in varying degrees, the eye, the mouth, the anus as degrees of matter. Pure positive multiplicities, where everything is possible, without exclusiveness, without negation. Syntheses operating without a plan, where the connections are transverse, the disjunctions included, the conjunctions polyvocal, indifferent to their underlying support, since this matter that serves them precisely as a support receives no specificity from any structural or personal unity, but appears as the body without organs that fills the space each time an intensity fills it. Signs of desire that compose a signifying chain, but that are not themselves signifying, and do not answer to the rules of a linguistic game of chess, but instead to the lottery drawings that sometimes cause a word to be chosen, sometimes a design, sometimes a thing or a piece of a thing, depending on one another only by the order of the random drawings, and holding together only by the absence of a link, non-localizable connections, having no other statutory condition than that of being dispersed elements of desiring machines that are themselves dispersed. It is this entire reverse side of the structure that Lacan discovers with the O machine, the big O, as non-human sex, schizophrenizing the analytic field instead of Oedipalizing the psychotic field. Partial objects is a real tough thing to get your head around. For me, it was. Affective objects, Wig, sure. You could maybe get close to that. Think instead that it's the collection of things that are intensities under which a unit of matter always fills a space in varying degree. It's the way these things are partial to being the I. They're positive multiplicities where everything is possible. It's the thing that your anus is, the thing that your mouth is, the thing this computer is. The hardening of that into a Platonic idea of representation is that it does those things, and it kind of sets up its relationships beforehand, just because you're taught what a computer is, and then you see a computer and you see how those relate. But these things, these desiring machines, are partial to being a computer. They're not a computer. You're not a person. This isn't a mouth. These are partial objects. It's all partial objects, intensities under which a unit of matter always fills space in varying degrees. Positive multiplicities where everything is possible. There's no exclusiveness. There's no negation. Instead, there are syntheses, the connections, disconnections, and conjunctions operating without plan. Without plan, where the connections are transverse, the disjunctions included. Conjunctions polyvocal. These are the three steps of the syntheses. They're indifferent to their underlying support, since this matter that serves them precisely as a support receives no specificity from any structural or personal unity. To say that again, the matter that serves them precisely as a support, because there's none, it has no, receives no specificity from a structural or personal unity. Instead, this stuff appears as the body without organs that fills the space each time this intensity fills it. It's partial. This stuff's partial to this. It's partial to that. When space fills it, it appears as the body without organs fills the space each time the intensity fills it. It's a completely different way of looking at sort of the totality of things. Individuation as a thing. This is very Simondoni. This is very Ruyeri, which is not a cheese. It's a writer, Raymond Ruyere. I would recommend both of them because kind of that's where all of this shit comes from, Ruyere especially, but Simondon as well. We have readings of both on our channel. You can go click somewhere around here. If you go deep in the channel, you'll find Ruyere and you'll find a ton of Simondon. And this is about how things become individuated. And for them, it's not so much, it's building off of those, but for them, it's the body without organs, this recording surface that seems to insert itself, seems to place itself, fills the space each time an intensity fills it. The intensity is the big deal, right? That's the thing. Signs of desire that compose a signifying chain but are not themselves signifying. They don't signify anything necessarily. They do not answer rules of linguistic games of chess, but instead, these things, these desiring machines, they answer the lottery drawings that sometimes cause a word to be chosen, sometimes a design, a thing, a piece of a thing. This is desiring production as it functions. It's extremely Nietzschean, Wick. Correct. It's extremely Nietzschean, but again, building a lot off of that. Ruyere is probably the closest, as I've been redoing my Ruyere reading and following along with our reading, again, elsewhere on the channel. Because the guys who run that are fucking next level. I'm a bumbling fool in comparison, so it's kind of nice to have that. It's very nice. Maps and Purple Flowers, polyvocal, creating events from differentials, no complete chains of ones, multiple ways of happening. It's, yes. That's, desiring production doesn't have any of those things. The conjunctions, the way they come together themselves are not biunivocalized and crushed. They are polyvocal. And again, desiring production doesn't give a shit about anything we're doing. It's still doing its thing. It doesn't give a fuck. It's a lot how people are like, oh my God, will the earth survive? It's like, yeah, the earth will survive. Humanity is what I'm worried about. And here is kind of the same thing. And we're wanting to have almost the opposite conversation because it's humanity we're worried about. We've got to care about the human. It's got to be centered around the human. It's got to be anthropological. It's got to be anthropomorphic. We've got to think of that. But instead, what we're doing is crushing desire machines into biunivocal connections that we string along. More or less. But yeah, it's playing in this sort of space. This is a collapsing of a lot of thinkers together. So there's kind of a whole bunch of stuff there. But yeah.
I like when you use the word anthropomorphic, right? Because where we kind of read that, we read that in the kind of
throughout the book.
Yeah, we read that also before, right? When kind of like Deleuze mentioned about the non-human sex and like we kind of fixated on specific molar function, which is the human sex, and like we still like occupied with that, right? And this is a kind of a originality that I never saw it, right? I never thought that the non-human aspect also is counted, right? In Deleuze, right? Lacan doesn't mention that. Psychoanalysis doesn't mention the non-human sex as such. They don't mention it. I read Lacan, and
Lacan does not. No. Sort of. So this is where, and it's this last line, and it's said oddly, but I think it is fair, and I think it's what they're crediting Lacan with is discovering really the O as machine and the big O as non-human sex. Now, Lacan didn't chase it down. Like that's the thing.
Exactly.
He didn't chase it down, but he did like basically brush all the dirt off the top. He just didn't flip the coin over, kind of thing.
Exactly.
And that's kind of the point. This reverse side of the structure that Lacan discovers: the O as machine, again, the machinic unconscious that they're going through here. The big O as non-human sex desire. And schizophrenizing the analytic field instead of Oedipalizing the psychotic field. This is, he did it. He did good job. And then just didn't, feels like he did a 1 punch instead of a 1-2 punch to Oedipus, basically.
Yeah.
Imran says, yep, psychoanalysis could have become way cooler if object relations theorists like Klein and Winnicott looked away from the Oedipal theater long enough to grasp objects in this broader way. Yeah, I mean, they go through Klein, and if you haven't read Klein, it's almost, I mean, again, at the time it was like, wow, what do you mean? So wait, trains going into the station is like a penis and a vagina. This Klein like wrote about that. Now it's like a joke everywhere. There's have you ever see the Naked Gun movies? Great one. They literally have like an entire montage of like all of this great, I don't know, train going in that, the rocket exploding, all of the things. There's like 5 straight minutes. And then it just turns out they were just watching a movie in bed. It's great. But that thing is almost like, go further, because it's not sex. Oh, wait, that scene would be a good one to represent this. I should use that I'm going to make a mark of that. It's a good one. Because it's not even sex. Like it's the representation of it that we're kind of stuck within, the symbolic, and that's kind of their critique. You just never quite made it. All right. I do want to keep pushing because this is going to be more Lacan for a little bit. It's going to just it really is. There are a handful of bottom notes here that I think are worth sort of spending a little bit of time on, just as we finish this out, because both of these are about the paragraph we just read. And it is, again, I'm not here to teach Lacan. If you want to learn about Lacan, 1, don't listen to me. 2, go listen to smarter people and go read Lacan, Zizek especially. Partial, again, as I went through, and this is the translator's note, partial, incomplete, or partial biased as a biased judge, a judge that is biased to a thing. You're supposed to be impartial, but you wouldn't say a whole body is impartial, right? It isn't partial, but that's it. This is why this English is fucking weird like that. So we've chosen to translate objects partials throughout as partial objects rather than as part objects, which is what Melanie Klein does. And I've seen other people make the move that it should be part objects. But again, I don't think it gets it across. In anticipation of this point of the book, where Deleuze and Guattari shift from Klein's concept of partial objects as a part of, because if you go back and you watch, you'll know that I went partial objects. It's like, the edges of your finger, but you can't really claim it because that's a full object. It's the parts between that. That's the Kleinian partial objects. Deleuze and Guattari, because they really, really like fucking with people in French, shift the word they use here a little bit. And so partial is kind of where they start playing with it. To continue. Hence, as an incomplete part of a lost unity or totality, towards a concept of partial objects as biased, evaluating intensities that know no lack, and are capable of selecting organs. This is the move they're making. Partial objects is actually objects partial. It's actually objects that are partial to, like they're desire machines that are partial to objects. Partial objects instead of part objects. Why do people have difficulty with this book? I can't imagine why. I just can't even imagine. Can't imagine. This goes into stuff that you're going to read in 1,000 Plateaus if you make it to that book. And I'm not going to do that here, but it's a big shift. And it's important for them to make that shift where we stop talking about the parts or partial objects and instead partial objects, if that makes sense. And I really don't want to go into this Lacan thing. I mean, this is actually in the original text. Fuck it. What is this quoting? Because this has to do, I know this is about desire, but it is, did they even, this fucking PDF left it out. Let me see. One sec, I've got my other copy up. And that PDF, it's under dispersed. Where is the dispersed? There it is. Oh, it's the apostrophe, because it's the exclamation point. Well done. Having no other statutory condition than that of being dispersed elements of desire machines that are themselves dispersed. Footnote time. In Eccrites, Serge Leclerc has made a profound attempt to define within this perspective the reverse side of the structure as the pure being of desire. In desire, he sees a multiplicity of pre-personal singularities or indifferent elements that are defined precisely by the absence of a link. I'm going to take a second on here. Pre-personal singularities is, again, when we're talking about partial objects, we are talking about that level of partial objects way before. This isn't, oh, it's part of a book, therefore it's a book. No. If you go back to The Whole in Its Parts, the section in this, they talk of things like Proust's In Search of Lost Time, where you wouldn't say Swann's Way is a part of In Search of Lost Time. You could, but the whole is kind of a thing that's alongside those parts because of how that book is written and how the other books in the series are written. It isn't the same as saying, for example, you have a ladder and there's two pieces of wood with one in between. You go, that's a part of a ladder, because a ladder can't really function with just one of those in theory. Yeah. But we do this with everything. When we say, like, this is a part of Brooks, or this is a part of me, this is a part of a computer, this is a part of my foot. All these things have very determined positions that they end up landing at. And this is about, in here, we're talking about the pre-personal singularities, the singularities of the tiniest bit of what you might call datum or anything that may exist. It's pre-personal singularities in a multiplicity, or in different elements that are defined precisely by the absence of a link between them. But this absence of a link and of a meaning is positive. The absence is positive. Oh, sorry. Did I interrupt someone? Someone trying to jump in? Oh, Marcellus, that's you.
The truth in the whole kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
Or like Hegel said, the truth in the whole, right? Signify something, which is kind of what Deleuze like. Man, like a lot of them saying like Deleuze is not like, how can we fit Deleuze to Hegel?
It's a direction for Deleuze. He's not anti-Hegel. It's a directionality. It's a question for him.
Yeah,
it's a question of like, is the whole and the parts, how do they work together? I think he and Hegel has some great, right? Like Hegel's got a lot of good shit, but it's about the direction of it, because it's a question of, are these things pre-personal singularities that are indifferent, that have no idea what they're connected to. They don't give a shit what they're connected to. They don't give a shit what they're part of. And they are defined precisely, the desiring machines, designed precisely by the absence of a link. Just to read a little bit. This absence of a link, and of course, meaning. That's a big one. And of course, meaning is positive. This lack is positive. It constitutes the specific force of coherence of this constellation. Of course, meaning and link can always be reestablished, if only by inserting fragments assumed to be forgotten. This is the very function of Oedipus. But if the analysis again discovers the link between two elements, this is a sign that they are not the ultimate irreducible terms of the unconscious. It will be noticed here that Leclerc uses this exact criterion of real distinction in Spinoza and Leibniz. The ultimate elements, the infinite attributes, are attributable to God because they do not depend on one another. They do not tolerate any relation of opposition or contradiction among themselves. The absence of all direct links guarantees their common participation in the divine substance. Likewise, for partial objects and the body without organs. The body without organs is substance itself, and the partial objects, the ultimate attributes or the elements of substance, to put it in Leibnizian and Spinozian terms. It's a good footnote. It's just a fucking lot at once.
Yeah. And I like that Spinoza, because Hegel mentions Spinoza, that is, Spinoza's substance lack the self-reference, right? To the subject, right? And Deleuze saying that, like, you know, you don't need all of that. You don't need the, you know, the self-referential subject. We already dispense with the theoretical subject. We already did that, right? Like I like that, you know. I like the kind of like critique, the subtle critiques of Hegel. You know, I like that, you know.
Deleuze is full of them.
I want people to critique Hegel. I want people to critique Hegel. The best thing is to be a Hegelian is to critique Hegel and to kind of read Deleuze, because he critiqued Hegel also. So that's why it's the best thing, you know.
I posted in the YouTube, and it's in our Discord, so you can search for it. If you're in the Discord, you can just search for everything you always want to know about Lacan, but we're afraid to ask Hitchcock, which is the name of the book. If you want to dive in, it's one, if you're a film fan, it's Zizek at his best. Like, his best is when he's breaking down why, you know, film structures work and how they sort of operate in this way, because I do think it's very good criticism and really brilliant often. But he does it purely to go through all of the terms that are really tough in Lacan, from synthome, which isn't really symptom, all the way to through like spatial systems, the nature of Zupanzik's in here. Zupanzik's so good. So is Jameson. He's got so many great little pieces in here written by so many good people. Highly, highly, highly suggested.
You mean Alanka Zupanchi?
Alenka, I am an American, so yes. Alenka Zupanchik. Is it Zupanchi? Please tell me.
Yes, I don't know, Zupanchi. I don't know. I pronounce it whatever, like Alanka Zupanchi. But
I went to school with someone who had that name, and they pronounced their last name Zupanzik. So
yeah,
they probably did that just because they had to. That's probably fair.
Yeah.
To be fair. All right. Make our way to the next paragraph. Diesel fiends, so stop thinking. I don't know if you're talking to me. I don't know what you're referring to. I'm actually not laconic on Lacan. I'm just, Lacan is, if you haven't read Eccrites, I mean, really in general, the way Lacan is sort of, Lacan gave talks, and Lacan gave really, really fucking good talks. Like, he really was, he was a blast to watch. He was very, very animated, and he very much brought up like pop culture stuff often, in very interesting ways. I still think his writing on the Purloined Letter is one of my favorite things on Poe. There's a book I love called The Purloined Poe. Highly recommend it. But the thing is, these things are then written down by his beloved student, who then published them as if they're written, as if they were to be written, and reading written words and how they're organized is not a great introduction to a thinker.
Terror.
It is awful. It really is.
Yeah.
It's I always go back to like my example would be Deleuze, who also gave a huge number of talks. Logic of Sense was effectively a series of lectures he gave, but it wasn't just a series of lectures that were then written out as books. They were actually rewritten and you know, structured differently and sort of better. I highly, highly recommend Logic of Sense. But Deleuze's lectures, they're out taken out of context all the time. There's a famous quote that people post all the time. If you are ever trapped in the dream of the other, you're fucked. And everyone, like, no one has a fucking clue what he's talking about there. You'll see people post about this and be like, yeah, other people's fantasies will ruin your day. And it's like, wait, he's talking about filmmakers and the nature of film. Like, he's not even having a conversation anymore, because if you don't know what he's talking about or the place of it, which was a film criticism forum, if you don't know these things, you don't know the audience, you don't, like, these things fuck with you. Written books are much easier, and Lacan doesn't have a ton of those. Lacan is mostly spoken. His written works are complicated for me, I would say.
By the way, fun fact, the king in the prolonged letter is the analyst. So,
well, that's spoilers.
Yeah, like, but I'll spoil it because
spoilers.
Spoilers, yeah.
I like his writing. Perla and Poe is a fantastic book. If you ever get a chance, find a copy, pick it up. It's really good. To continue, because it starts to get a little more clear. Everything hinges on the way in which the structure is elicited from the machines, according to planes of consistency or of structuration, and lines of selection that correspond to the large statistical aggregates or molar formations that determine the links and reduce production to representation. That is where the disjunctions become exclusive, the connections global, and the conjunctions biunivocal. At the same time that the support gains a specificity under a structural unity, and the signs themselves become signifying under the action of a despotic symbol that totalizes them in the name of its own absence or withdrawal. Yes, in fact, there the production of desire can be represented only in terms of an extrapolated sign that joins together all the elements of production in a constellation of which it is not itself a part. There, the absence of a tie necessarily appears as an absence, and no longer as a positive force. There, desire is necessarily referred to as a missing term, whose very essence is to be lacking. The signs of desire, being non-signifying, become signifying in representation only in terms of a signifier of absence or of lack. The structure is formed and appears only in terms of the symbolic term defined as lack. The great other, as the non-human sex gives way, in representation to a signifier of the great other, as an always missing term, the all too human sex, the phallus of molar castration. The footnote from Lacan is a quote. For want of this signifier, all the others would represent nothing. Serge Leclerc shows how the structure is organized around a missing term, or rather, a signifier of lack. Quote, it is the elective signifier of the absence of a link, the phallus, that we find again in the unique privilege of its relation to the essence of lack, an emblem of difference par excellence. The irreducible difference, the difference between the sexes. If man can talk, this is because at one point in the language system there is a guarantor of the irreducibility of lack, the phallic signifier. How strange all this is. And them continuing to shit on Lacan, as they do. As they do. As they do. As they do. Do I want to spend time going into this? I feel like I could, but I also feel like we're kind of beating a dead horse at this point. You guys tell me.
Let's carry on. Like this, like reading, right? Reading of the Greek, right?
And reading Ecretes is a fucking beast, man. Oh.
Yeah, like this kind of, I spend a year like understanding Lacan, so this moment is special for me, like like it's
the big deal in this paragraph. Let's go through a couple top line things and then just make sure we get there. Is we're talking about the chaos of desire. That's the brunt of what this book is and what we're sort of doing as the foundation, right? The chaos of desire. They open up this paragraph, and we'll go back over to it, and it's kind of the point of the paragraph, actually. Everything hinges on the way in which structure is elicited from the machines. Structure is elicited from the desiring machines, according to planes of consistency or structuration. This is how chaotic desire becomes organized into a coherent system. The planes of consistency is the system, basically, and we talk about arrangements, or some people use assemblage, but this is like D&G's term for the productive capacity of desire being sort of enabled. According to planes of consistency or structuration, and lines of selection that correspond to these large statistical aggregates. These are the large macro level structures. That's what molar means. Molar, molecular are the two halves. Remember, it's all desiring machines. Just like if I have a molecule of carbon or a mole of carbon, I don't have two different things. I have two regimes of things, in the words of the book, or two magnitudes of things. That doesn't change them. It changes how they interact, what I can do with them. But it is just them in aggregate. And they do stuff in aggregate that one alone doesn't do. That's the statistical aggregate. That's the large macro structure that captures desire, that organizes desire, organizes desire by social codes and other things. That's the setup we're talking about here. And it's through this that everything becomes exclusive. This is how we get desire. Remember, it's the other side of the coin. Chaotic desire. Well, how do we get to the other side? Well, the other side of the coin is this. This is where disjunctions become exclusive, and global and conjunctions biunivocal. This is all of these things. So the other side of the coin. We took a deep dive in the last paragraph to get to this side of the coin, and they're like, and then this is how it works. This is how it plays. And it's ultimately that last line, the phallus of molar castration, which they end up with the footnote, is a giant fuck you to psychoanalysis. Like, it's a giant fuck you in the way that they do it, which isn't really hateful or anything, but it's like, hey, you've kind of reduced the complexity of everything to this phallus of molar castration. And this is the thing that marks all the differences when it comes to sex, when it comes to sort of castrated desire. You've reduced everything to this one point. Good job, basically.
And totalize it at the same time.
Yep.
And audibilize it, like Freud, right? Which is
yes.
Kind of like, it's kind of phenomenal. Like deleuze, like this is phenomenal. I have to say, this is specifically Guattari, though. Like, it's deleuze writing. The way they worked is Guattari, who, if you've ever read his writing, you'll understand why they did it this way. He would send like note cards and sheets and notes and all to Deleuze, and Deleuze would turn it into a book. But if you go back and you read Logic of Sense, Deleuze was not down this path without Guattari. He was very much playing down the psychoanalytic. He was doing something interesting with it, with the way he handled Oedipus and the surface effects in Logic of Sense. But without Guattari, he wouldn't have kind of made the leap towards an understanding of how to combine the machinic with the vitalistic, which is what, they're critiquing Lacan for not doing here effectively. Maybe I'm oversimplifying a bit, but that's probably, no, that's okay. I would say that's probably fine. Yeah. Next paragraph, unless we have questions, let me double check and see if anyone's screaming at me. Does AO have a glossary in the back that explains these terms, Jimbo says? What do you think this is? A book? No. No. The book is the thing that explains the terms. You have to remember, when we start talking about how they're using these and how this is forming, the idea that all words have a specific meaning, if we can just get back to it, is something they're sidestepping a bit. It's what is, as they've talked about, and as master signification would imply, or as Deleuze does in Logic of Sense, it's the thing that is given to us by the despotic overcoding that happens to language, where all words necessarily kind of come back to a singular point of truth. This word means that.
but of course those words mean other things. So there's an infinite regression of it, but we have a truth of what these words mean. This is less intended to be directly that. They're playing with the creation of concepts. Concepts don't play in a hard-lined space of here is what it means and it always means that and that's it. It's a significantly more contingent relational existence that concepts have. Deleuze goes into this in What is Philosophy, where it's very much about the mechanisms within the concept, but also the relationship of that concept as if it were friends with other concepts and like hanging out in a village with a bunch of concepts that are related and they all have Deleuze's name on them because they're Deleuze's concepts, or they're hanging out with what, like this is, they talk about it like it's a Sims episode. Like it's wild. And it's the way to consider it instead of, well, what does this exactly mean? A lot of these other words, Lacan stuff does have that. For him, it does. And he goes through these, and Zizek does this. But even then, yeah, not so much. It's tough. It's tougher. It's tougher. It's a lot like asking, what is a woman? You know, a woman is it's a concept more than anything. And it's not the kind of thing we can go, oh, that's, yeah, yep, yes or no. Always truth, always false. It's not really how anything works. And certainly not this book. That's for goddamn sure.
I think Matt Walsh and conservatives lack abstract thinking, and they still
Really?
hanged.
If you didn't see it, Tim Pool last night, I was watching on Kids Stream. Tim Pool was having an argument with another streamer, Pisco, I guess, I think is his name. And they were talking, and Tim Pool believed that there's no such thing as legal advice that can be illegal because legal is in the definition of legal advice. So a lawyer who gives legal advice can never break the law. That's how baby-brained these people are. I'm not joking when I say this, by the way. Like he said it multiple times in many different ways. It was magic. Like it was like
that's picture thinking. That's for Stellen.
It's baby brained. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I kept watching because I was like, no, he doesn't mean, he does. He did mean that. He literally meant that. All right. Mute up. Let's get moving. All right. Here too, Lacan's approach appears in all its complexity. For it is certain that he does not enclose the unconscious in an Oedipal structure. He shows, on the contrary, that Oedipus is imaginary, nothing but an image, a myth, that this or these images are produced by an Oedipalizing structure, that this structure acts only insofar as it reproduces the element of castration, which itself is not imaginary, but symbolic. There we have three major planes of structuration, which correspond to the molar aggregates. Oedipus as the imaginary reterritorialization of private man, produced under the structural conditions of capitalism, inasmuch as capitalism reproduces and revives the archaism of the imperial symbol or the vanished despot. All three are necessary, precisely in order to lead Oedipus to the point of its self-critique. The task undertaken by Lacan is to lead Oedipus to such a point. Likewise, Elizabeth Rudinesco has clearly seen that in Lacan, the hypothesis of an unconscious as language does not closet the unconscious in a linguistic structure, but leads linguistics to its point of autocritique by showing how the structural organization of signifiers still depends on a despotic great signifier acting as archaism. I mean, why do people find Anti-Oedipus difficult? I have no idea why. It's crazy. Oh wait, I can imagine. Never mind. I'm figuring it out as we're talking. Poof, 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 poof. Oof, 1 second. No one answer messages from 61. God damn it. 61's a moderator on our server. 61 keeps getting hacked. God damn it. I have to keep taking them off of the fucking moderation staff. 2 seconds, sorry. Just anytime someone gets hacked, I have to just remove them from things in the server. It's normal. It's one of the things I have to do when I am moderating all of this shit. Come on, where are the roles? There are roles. We go. Boop. What the fuck? Come on. And we'll return that to 61 when they respond and stop getting their shit hacked. God damn it. I get messages on Discord from, I know 62. Click here for a gift card to Steam. I'm like, I'm pretty sure you didn't send me a gift card. Pretty sure you didn't send me a gift card. Sorry, I shouldn't be laughing. I feel awful because it sucks when that happens, but it's the second or third time, and 61's writing back, oh my God, I'm here working on it. I have 2-factor authentication on. I'm like, I shouldn't be laughing, but I feel bad. I'll help them diagnose this problem later. Poor 61. That sucks. Look, I'm not super jazzed to sort of dive down the angle of this, to be very frank. This is a lot in this paragraph. And it is just continuing the critique. It's continuing the critique specifically into the way that language and symbolic structures interact within Lacan's sort of Bromian knot and how the imaginary symbolic come about. But they're doing it again from the position of desiring production. What they're saying is like, because once you get into this and you can start and this is what they're showing, this isn't just that they're saying, here's this other way of thinking and everything goes wrong. They're like, no. With desiring production and us talking through this, you can actually understand. And that's what they're trying to do in these sections before we get to properly the tasks of schizoanalysis, is to say, we can actually explain these things. Here's how these things work within schizoanalysis. Oedipus isn't some, imaginary, idealized thing that's off in the ether that's not material, which people say. It's like, no. Oedipus is the imaginary reterritorialization of private man, produced under the structural conditions of capitalism, inasmuch as capitalism reproduces and revives the archaism of imperial symbol or vanished despot. These are the molar aggregates at play. Oedipus, private man, capitalism, the despot. These are the way that these things work together. This is the process of desiring production under determinate conditions, which is kind of how everything works. That's what everything is that stuff. That's what it is. And so I'm not super jazzed to sort of spend a ton of time on it, but hey, what can I say? Maybe we will. Probably not. Don't get excited. Don't get too excited. Next bit. I think next bit. If everyone's okay with it. Because this is where it gets. I want to keep moving because this is where we get to the good stuff, as far as I'm concerned, for schizoanalysis. What is this point of self-criticism? I'll say that wrong. What is this point of self-criticism? It is the point where the structure, beyond the images that fill it and the symbolic that conditions it within representation, reveals its reverse side as a positive principle of non-consistency that dissolves it, where desire is shifted into the order of production, related to its molecular elements, and where it lacks nothing, because it is defined as the natural and sensuous objective being, at the same time as the real is defined as the objective being of desire. For the unconscious of schizoanalysis is unaware of persons, aggregates, laws, and of images, structures, and of symbols. It is an orphan, just as it is an anarchist and an atheist. It is not an orphan in the sense that the father's name would designate an absence, but in the sense that the unconscious reproduces itself wherever the names of history designate present intensities, the sea of proper names. The unconscious is not figurative, since its figural is abstract, the figure schiz. It's not structural, nor is it symbolic, for its reality is that of the real in its very production, in its very inorganization. It is not representative, but solely machinic and productive. That's good stuff there. Let's try. Why have they been going down this point of self-criticism for Oedipus and for Lacan and for all of this? Where is this self-criticism achieving? Remember, this previous is bringing up a self-criticism, but it's leading linguistics to the point of autocritique. Lacan has led Oedipus to such a point. They're talking about the position. They're not talking about like a point as in a statement, but the point of autocritique, the placement of it, this edge of the coin that we're talking about, the flipped side of the coin, one being the chaos of desire, the other being the structured sort of everything. What is that point? Well, that is the point where the structure, beyond the images that fill it and the symbolic conditions within representation, reveals its reverse side as the positive principle of inconsistency that dissolves it. This is the placement of this. This is the place where desire is shifted into the order of production, related to its molecular elements, where it lacks nothing, because it is defined as the natural and sensuous objective being, and the real is defined as the objective being of desire. This is flatly saying their ontology. This is like the shortest version of all of chapter 1 of this book, basically, that they're trying to get people to go to, because they're saying that the unconscious, the way desire functions, the sensuous and natural objective behavior, the objective being, then we also have the real, which is defined as the objective being of desire. These things interact. Again, the real's consistently what is produced by desire imminently, constantly. This is not again, this is a critique of Lacan. I feel like I'm just going to end up getting into fucking Lacan for like hours. Oh, God. It's going to be a lot. But that is the point here. For the unconscious of schizoanalysis is unaware of persons, aggregates, and laws, images, structures, and symbols. The unconscious here, desiring production, desire, the natural and sensuous objective being of desire. It doesn't, what the fuck are any of these things? It's an orphan, as they say, but it's not an orphan in the sense of like, oh, it's missing its daddy, but an orphan in the sense of like, there is like, it works for anything. It can enjoin anything. It reproduces itself wherever the names of history designate present intensities. When someone who is, and in their term, and in our terms today, even schizophrenic, and they are claiming to be Jesus or Napoleon or anything, they're pulling from the names of histories that which represents the current, designates present intensities. They're the proper names of particular configurations of desire and intensity that are being experienced by that subject. So the subject goes, oh, I'm Jesus, because that's what's being produced. It's all the constellation of desire that's coming. It doesn't have a name, not itself. We give it a name. I say I'm feeling very Brooks today, and you all say you're feeling very you. Good for you. It's the same thing. We are feeling and calling upon the present names because of the present intensities, this universal sort of system. It's not that they're crazy. We do the same thing. That's the whole point of what they're talking about when they talk about the schizophrenic. It's not saying to go schizo. It's understanding the process through which all of us operate and all of us find ourselves and all of us come sort of in this. Again, it's a universalist project. This is not saying we need to be more like them. No, we already are. we just haven't noticed. And once you start looking at it and feeling it and seeing it, spend time around kids, and it reifies this position incredibly. They pull in whatever intensities they're feeling, They pull in what they understand to be the proper name of those intensities in the history of the world. They will be Pokemon. Sure. That's what they understand, that intensities. This is how they work out what they are. This is people. This is people. It's not structural. It's not symbolic. It's the reality is that of the real in its very production, in its very inorganization. It's chaos. It is not representative, but solely machinic and productive. Solely machinic and productive. Right? We're just going to move forward because I really just feel like we want to.
It reminds me of some of the lines from Nietzsche, right? Especially on human all too human, right? He talking about the religious after pains, right? But the religious after pain, right? But he's kind of relating to that, right? He relating to the religious after pain, which is kind of like I will rephrase the quote, right? I will rephrase the quote if you have something in the time of your audience, right? Quote, that's in Human All Too Human, religious after pain. However much we believe we have weaned ourselves from religion, this has still not occurred insofar as we take pleasure in encountering religious sensations and moods without conceptual content. For example, in music, and if a philosophy shows us some justification for metaphysical hopes, for profound peace of soul of attaining therein, and speaks, for example, of a complete and confident gospel in the gaze of Raphael Madonna, we respond to such expressions and statement and especially here felt away. The philosopher has it easier here by proof. He corresponds in what he wants to give with the heart ready to accept it. We noticed in this how the less reflective free spirit really takes offense only at the dogma, but are very familiar with the magic of religious sensation. It hurts them to let go of the latter on account of the former. Scientific philosophy must be very careful not to smuggle in errors on the basis of that need, an acquired and consequently also a transitory need. Even logician speaks of the presentism. That's important. Even logicians speak of presentism of truth in morality and art, for instance, of a presentism in the essence of things is, quote unquote, that the essence of things. So, for instance, he makes an example, for instance, of the presentism, quote unquote, that of the essence of the things is one, which is really should be forbidden to them. Between carefully inferred truths and such intuited things, there remains an unbridged, sorry about that, hold on.
PDFs are fun.
God, it's I hate PDF. So, sorry. Between carefully inferred truths and such intuited, quote unquote, things, there's remain an unbridgeable gulf, since we owe the former to the intellect, the latter to need. Hunger does not prove that the food that would state exist, yet it wishes for this food. Quote, having presentism, quote unquote, doesn't mean knowing in any degree that something exists, but instead in taking its existence to be possible insofar as we wish for it or fear it. The quote unquote presentism does not take us to a single step further into the land of certainty. We involuntarily believe that the religiously tangent sections of philosophy are better proven than the other, but it's basically the reverse. We simply have the inner wishes that it might be so. Hence, that what makes us unhappy might also be true. This longing mislead us into and accepting bad reasons as good ones. So the presentism, right?
Right. Well, and just to go with this, because
Yeah.
I want to run, because it's one of the things I want to talk about is actually, this hits nice. So here's the challenge with Lacan. Lacan's entire thing is about consciousness. Now, this makes sense. He is an analyst. That's his jam. Like, his jam is like how the consciousness works. But he's taking everything from that position. This is Deleuze's criticism of every single thinker that he ever goes with is kind of this. For Plato, it's that Plato, figured out and talked about contemplation as an act and a thing, but then mistook everything for contemplation, thus Platonic ideality and representation. For Lacan, the critique, and it's Guattari's critique that Deleuze is running with, it's a good combo, is that Lacan, by starting with the place of consciousness, he sees the real as impossible, which is fair. They're not going to fight that. The real is impossible, but that's the problem, is it's impossible to consciousness. The part you're reading, and it's Human All Too Human, the 100% Nietzsche's jam in that book is getting back to this idea of like the difference between the religious, the theosophic, the thought-based part of humanity, and actually life and like lived life. Because to lived life, the real is not impossible. The real's necessary. The real's necessary. The real itself is only impossible from the position of consciousness, not from life. And so when we talk about this and we start really diving into that setup, this is their core sort of thing. Just to quote Holland real quick, the fundamental difference separating Deleuze and Guattari from Lacan: he takes the perspective of consciousness and the talking cure. They follow Marx and Nietzsche. They take the perspective of life and the production of life. From this perspective, the original top half of that schema, the Borromean knot, as a whole thing, the relations designated by represents simply the desiring production of the real, inasmuch as the objective being of desire is the real in and of itself. And that's, again, from AO. And so they have their line. Lacan's admirable theory of desire has two poles, one related to the object petit a as a desire machine, which defines desire in terms of real production. The other related to the great other as signifier, which introduces lack. It is the productive, constitutive relation of desire to the real that always forms the point of departure for schizoanalysis, against which to measure the imposition of lack by special forces. And these are not always Oedipus, but rather historicity, other items that they are going to be getting into literally right now. And so for them, the push and the misunderstanding for Lacan is that he never, like, desire is born of this, but he never noticed, like, because again, he was taking the position of consciousness, that the real, which was always outside for him, was actually the real and life. And that consciousness, which exists in a different place, is born of this. And this is the departure point for schizoanalysis. This is what this paragraph is about. That it is not orphan in the sense that the father's name would designate an absence, but in the sense that the unconscious reproduces itself wherever the names of history designate present intensities. It's not figurative. Its figural is abstract. It's not structural nor symbolic. For its reality is that of the real in its very production, in its very inorganization. It is not representative, but purely, solely machinic and productive. So it's a shift for them.
Yeah. Kind of taking one step further to the real, which is like my favorite.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, the real's being directly produced by desire at all times.
Yeah, that's what I like. Yeah,
It's very vitalistic. It gets back to the stuff of Marx and Nietzsche. It's why I wanted to jump in, because the piece you're reading is 100% that from Nietzsche. It's the same point. It's stepping away from the I don't know how to put it. The I don't know.
Presentism.
Yeah,
Presentism.
presentism's good. There's a removal of vitality from things that happens when you reach the space of representation and images. And that is, for Deleuze, a lot of Nietzsche is very focused around the production of that and how it works. Deleuze's book on Nietzsche is phenomenal that way. Again, he gets that from Klosowski. Klosowski's book on Nietzsche is even better. But to continue, because that's kind of the points they're going to be making. Destroy, destroy. The task of schizoanalysis goes by way of destruction, a whole scouring of the unconscious, a complete curettage. Destroy Oedipus, the illusion of the ego, the puppet of the superego, guilt, the law, castration. It's not a matter of such pious destructions, such as those performed by psychoanalysis under benevolent neutral eye of the analyst. For those are Hegel-style destructions, ways of conserving. How is it that the celebrated neutrality and what psychoanalysis calls, or dares to call, the disappearance or the dissolution of the Oedipus complex do not make us burst into laughter? We're told that Oedipus is indispensable, that it is the source of every possible differentiation, that it saves us from the terrible non-differentiated mother. But this terrible mother, the Sphinx, is herself part of Oedipus. Her non-differentiation is merely the reverse of the exclusive differentiations created by Oedipus. She is herself created by Oedipus. Oedipus necessarily operates in the form of this double impasse. We are told Oedipus, in its turn, must be overcome, and that this is achieved through castration, latency, desexualization, and sublimation. But what is castration if not still Oedipus, to the nth power, now symbolic, and therefore all the more virulent? And what is latency, this pure fable, if not the silence imposed on desiring machines, so that Oedipus can develop, be fortified in us, so that it can accumulate its poisonous sperm and gain the time necessary for propagating itself, for passing on to our future children? What is the elimination of castration anxiety in its turn? Desexualization, sublimation, if not divine acceptance of and infinite resignation to bad conscience, which consists for the woman of the appeased wish for a penis destined to be converted into a wish for a baby and for a husband, and for the man in assuming his passive attitude and in subjecting himself to a father substitute. This is just them shitting more on Oedipus, they're just basically continuing down this process. Isn't this ridiculous that we have this type of thing? We move beyond Oedipus, we end up with this. It's still fucking Oedipus, isn't it? The structure is still there. So what are we doing? Why are you saying this? What is, these things are, and you're finding excuses like latency, for example. Latency is one of the best that they have there, but it's like you have all these excuses for why things must be this way or have to be this way, but are certainly not Oedipus, even though they're totally necessarily Oedipus. Why are you doing this shit? Stop that shit. This is the short version of that paragraph.
This is for a long time since I read The Holy Family.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of heard about bad consciousness. This is the first time in any Marxist French theory. I don't know, but this is the first time I hear it from Deleuze. Kind of, maybe I'm naive, but this is the first time, these people engage in bad conscience, right?
Well, this is them breaking down how all of this is born of bad conscience. And it's, again, bad conscience in the sense of Spinoza, in the sense of, fucking Leibniz, Nietzsche, the very common sort of concept around the thing. But again, we've got to be careful. You must refuse mom because she's a position of pleasure and desire. But she's part of the Oedipal structure itself. So Oedipalization is good, except for this part of this thing. But it's their, again, core critique sort of over and over and over. And the big point here ultimately is less really the critiques of Oedipus, which they've levied throughout the book, but instead they're kind of going hey, do you notice, by the way, destruction of these things actually results in them sticking around? We're actually talking about real destruction. They're scouring the unconscious. They're using they mean slicing shit off and getting rid of it. But psychoanalysis doesn't do that. They don't destroy, they conserve things inside of other things, and they keep that sort of going. That play is kind of it keeps the concepts. Again, this is they say this is like Hegel's dialectics, fair. And this is why I say the direction. Deleuze and Hegel, you can find correlation in really fun, interesting ways to co-read them. We had someone on our server some time ago who actually was doing a Deleuze reading through Hegel. They're like Hegel experts. It's pretty cool. But it is the direction. What are you trying to do? Are you trying to destroy and actually move on with something new? Or are you trying to destroy in the sense of the larger concept, but keep the pieces and reorganize them and move them into different stuff? Yeah, that's kind of a different thing that they're talking about here.
If you walk to the path that destroying Aufhebung in German, right, which is kind of taking something aside, taking something in your pocket, right, and or if you kind of want to produce something new by it, right, that's something we have to kind of banner around, right, and we have to adopt. But if you want to keep it, right, keep it and preserve it, right, my friends, you're not you're circling. You're kind of like, it's kind of like crazy. It's kind of like right-wing Hegelians saying we have to stick with fate and mediate fate, right? But enlightenment on the other side facing you, right? The other facing you, right? So it's kind of like it's kind of like we have to go. We have to. Why we stop at that, right?
Yes.
Why we stop at that?
Why do we keep the stuff? It's the phrasing they used is that Lacan came in, and what he did is he tied dynamite to the pillars of Oedipus, blew them all up, but of course Oedipus just fell down into the same exact position. It's the destructive task maintained the old, and this is the this next paragraph is this. We are all the more extricated from Oedipus as we become a living example, an advertisement, a theorem in action so as to attract our children to Oedipus. We have evolved in Oedipus. We have been structured in Oedipus, and under the neutral and benevolent eye of the substitute, we have learned the song of castration, the lack of being that life is. Yes, it is through castration, I'm not singing this, that we gain access to desire. What one calls the disappearance of Oedipus is Oedipus become an idea. Only the idea can inject the venom. Oedipus has to become an idea so that it sprouts each time a new set of arms and legs, lips and mustache. Quote, in tracing back the memory deaths, your ego becomes a sort of mineral theorem which constantly proves the futility of living. We have been triangulated in Oedipus, and will triangulated in turn. In it, in turn. God. From the family to the couple, from the couple to the family. In actuality, the benevolent neutrality of the analyst is very limited. It ceases the instant one stops responding to daddy mommy. It ceases the instant one introduces a little desiring machine, the tape recorder, into the analyst's office. It ceases as soon as a flux, is made to circulate that does not let itself be stopped by Oedipus. That's a flow, actually, I believe. And the mark of the triangle, they tell you have a libido too viscous, too liquid, contraindications for analysis. It's pretty great. I'm a big fan. This isn't about purely going to the analyst's couch. The analyst's couch helps a huge amount. LJ, that's been literally 4 years. So I don't even know if they're around anymore. But this is where it's not about the analyst's couch. They make the comment in here that even the analyst is actually more limited. The moment you introduce a tape recorder, this is a thing that happens in analysis. You don't want to really say that you maybe say everything's being recorded in like a first session, but you don't want to make a note of it. You don't want it to be sitting out in front of them. When people are talking to a tape recorder, we already know that things are fucked up, and it's not quite the same as if no one else is there and things will never leave the room. Now there's more. Now there's other things to worry about. There's other stuff going on. That thing changes the entire conversation. This thing that the analyst is doing, it's limited. It breaks very, very easy. It takes very little to shatter it. Instead, it's built in us. Familialism built in us, and then we evolve in it, and we replicate it in everything we do and how we treat others and how we interact. We reinforce Oedipus in other people and ourselves in all of our interactions. This is the thing. It's not just Oedipus. We reinforce representation. They're using Oedipus as the sort of stalking horse of it, but this is what we're doing. We've learned the song of castration. Yes, it is through castration we gain access to desire. That's not really it. Not really. We cheer it on, but that ain't the jam. That is not the jam. And that's, again, their critique coming through, in my mind, fairly cleanly here, as I read it. Anyone got a thing? It's all very paradoxical. Psychoanalysis very much is. But it also thrives on that. That's like the nature of the beast for them. Lacan actually talks about it a good amount, about the way it becomes sort of self-referential, but that is part of the again, when you have this running, that's the whole point. Once you have it going, and it seems like it's working, and you're seeing it work in other people, and it's being reified in yourself, you will find reasons to just like the justification that builds on top of it. To the end, they have one of my favorites at the very end there. There are analysts who, they don't phrase it like this when they go, oh, you have a libido that's a little too viscous, too liquid, or contraindicated. You will actually be told by a therapist or a psychoanalyst, yeah, actually, I don't think this kind of therapy is right for you. And it's like, oh, weird. That works. How's that work? How the fuck's that work? That seems a little fucked up to tell people. It is. It is fucked up to tell people because it is, as they even name it earlier in the book, this is the double bind of therapy and the mental sort of order of things that we have now, where if you're not Oedipalized, there's nothing. You need to become a better member of society. What does that mean? How do you learn to control yourself? How do you work with if you don't have these pieces, there's nothing. And so that double bind, yeah.
I'm sorry. Void, which means like you become like Spinoza's.
You spin into the void is the phrasing for them, and they use the example of the catatonic patient who fully has nothing to sort of offer, or the fact that people who we put in this position of schizophrenia, who are produced in a way that can't be productive for society or can't hold a very standing job, that's kind of what they're talking about. It's this weird place we put people where it's like, either get in line or you're irrelevant and you're off in the void, as they do phrase it throughout the book very much.
Yeah. Can we say that there is pop psychology? Like, there is.
Oh my God, there's pop everything. It's nature of capital.
Yeah. So I don't know. Well, I don't know if it's a naive question, but I'm kind of like, yeah, there is pop psychology. There is, and it doesn't need Deleuze to say it. You know, it doesn't like
No.
it doesn't.
Well,
yeah.
This is again, think of Jordan Peterson's books, which I would put in pop psychology, I think, pretty cleanly. The 12 Ways of Being Better Dude, or the new 12 Ways of Being an Even Better Dude, or that, whatever they're called. That thing that he's doing, that thing is not giving options. It's not saying, hey, here's the things that work for a lot of people, but if not, you're cool. That's not what it's saying. It's explicitly that here is the way to have a better life. If you don't do these things, you will be a failure. It is this or void. this or void, Oedipus or void. And all of those things are very much Oedipus and sort of structuration in really, really hard mother, father, me, familialist terms, because there is no alternative to that. Because this is how ultimately the space of the despotic order and representation forces biunivocalization out of things. Desire being polyvocal, having just a myriad of connections that it's able to sort of work with. If it's not crushed into these specific workings in these specific ways, in these particular circumstances, at these particular times, no one wants it. We're good. Fuck off. And that thing enforces biunivocalization. You see it with children, and we learn it throughout our lives as adults, and it's a thing that becomes very, very much beaten into us. And that thing is biunivocalization, very much. And we act like, and they talk, and it's the phrasing that they have here is the neutral psychoanalyst is the line that they're talking about here. It's just this thing that's sort of this weird lie that the neutral and benevolent eye of a substitute. We've learned the song of castration, but it's not neutral and it's not a benevolent eye. Oedipus is not this thing that it forces this thing or you get out. And in fact, it's so neutral that the slightest thing in the world will actually knock it off center. That's kind of like, that's what they're saying is they're like, this is antagonistic to desire. It's representationally based. This is them placing their critique in a very particular way.
Mhm.
Brooks, I want to jump in a little bit since we have
Please.
So I have two small instances. There are some readings of Freud and how so-called progressive at the time he is towards the so-called homosexuality at his time. And he was saying that, it costs a lot of energy for some people in a society to repress in a proper way, to be neurotic in certain typical way. And these people are not necessarily good or bad, but they did contribute to the society tremendously. So they're not pathologic. Okay, so these are some of the more famous readings about his attitudes towards the homosexuals in his time. And I had a small conversation with one of my past analysts, and she said this very interesting thing. She says, don't be so stubborn or something. And she says, you are living in the past. You are not trying enough at this place, whatever, right? So, and then I asked her, I said, do you think I can only stay in the country where I grew up? Or is there only the United States that's available option? Is it an either or for you? It sounds like you're trying to inscribe these things into me, right? Because it looks like, both from my perspective, these two discourse, whether it is about the diverse culture discourse in California or the politically somehow correct discourse back in Freud's time towards homosexuality, they are jumping out of everything and says, we are the neutral, we're the maybe some sort of universal person that we can judge the contribution of these marginal people on civilization. And then they go into somehow a little bit more close to libidinal structure, but not quite the same. I wonder whether you see, regarding to what they're describing in this paragraph specifically, I wonder whether you think these two analysts, they're saying the same thing, albeit through different discourse. One is more political, another one is more personal trait based.
I'm genuinely, and I'm asking, are you talking about the next paragraph without knowing it, or do you know that you're talking about the next paragraph?
I am not reading this. In the
Fuck.
next paragraph.
This is like if I had written a question, like if this was a TV show that we faked, That's a fucking crazy way to lead into the next. So let's talk about that. So let's talk about two psychoanalysts, maybe not who you're thinking about, but I'll bring it about. Wilhelm Reich, famous psychoanalyst, thinker, broke from Freud because for him, he really wanted to focus, I guess for him, it was a lot more on sort of sexual liberation and the sort of personal experience of that. He wrote The Mass Psychology of Fascism, which is a phenomenal book, 100% worth reading, that he wrote in 1933. So he wrote it before knowing how important that time was or what it was. Fromm is the other psychoanalyst they're going to talk about, a psychologist, maybe. Psycho something in that. But he broke from Freud, and his thing was actually about the bureaucracy and the centering in a slightly different way, kind of talking about the character development over time someone gains, and specifically critiquing the bureaucratic nature of psychoanalytic thought and sort of existence as a thing. He wrote The Art of Loving and To Have or To Be. I have my notes up already on the next chapter. So when you're mentioning and you're talking about like these two sides, D&G are going to make, they both like these guys. Like these are people they've both, and Guattari especially, really pulls a lot from them. But they don't go far enough because through all of this, they're still starting and talking about what is the bureaucracy in the human perspective. They're talking about it from what is sex from a human perspective. That's the thing. Whereas underneath it, it's like, well, what are these things from desire's perspective? And desire doesn't have a perspective. So how do these things operate in the disorganized, the chaosophy, the chaos of things? And then how are we able to structurate things that this is able to filter into? And this is where Fromm and Reich don't go far enough, as they're going to come to say. So I don't know if that answers exactly what you're saying, but I feel like it's an amazing lead in.
It's almost the same. It almost goes to the same surface level at the bureaucracy because, I do understand that what the analyst was saying. And then fun fact about this analyst, she was trained in Venezuela. And the Lacanian thoughts are actually very prevalent in specifically that area and a lot of other area.
Oh, Fromm was very, very influenced by Lacan, like very, very much.
I'm just saying that it seems like after a few years practicing in the United States, she regressed to a certain orthodoxy of Oedipal complex. This is very interesting because the same thing happened during the Cold War. There was a researcher that did her PhD thesis on Cold War Freud, where a lot of these ideas about the bureaucracy in the psychoanalysis institutes started to change themselves when it got spread from Europe to North America, specifically the United States. So what I observed is has something to do with how, you said they go into the molecular and then they universalize something. And it seems like it's more of like a play, right?
Very much. Well, so like Fromm has, I just pulled up a couple of my favorite lines from Fromm. Most people aren't even aware of their own need to conform. They live under the illusion that they follow their own ideas and inclinations, that they are a true individualist. Things like that you can see why D&G attached to it and why it's a step away from Freud and those things. Modern capitalism requires that man cooperates smoothly in large numbers, who wants to consume more and more, whose tastes are standardized and can be influenced and anticipated. He was very big on the bureaucracy, the system that's driving and pushing everything forward. He was very big, like super Marxy Lacan direction of shit for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just saying that, even within the Lacanian tradition, they revert back to a very Freudian kind of analysis where you go to analysis 3 or 4 times per week, and then they're going to tell you, why are you so stubborn on these things I'm telling you, right? And it's not like I do not understand that maybe I am indeed living in the past, and because that's how trauma works, where there has been no war or no major political or natural disasters. But I do have something called complex trauma, and the complex trauma has to come from somewhere, right? And then whatever that flow of the meaning was formed in a special structure, it seems like her training and Lacanian background deals nothing even similar to this level after she practiced in the United States for about 10 years. And I think this is
Love
something
it.
very interesting about
Yep.
the institution of large and within psychoanalysis. This is not just about psychoanalysis anymore. So I wonder whether, this is more of a politics, because politics deal with these things a lot,
Ooh.
and
Ooh.
maybe to do with the non-political ones that goes into all of other areas, not just the politics, right? So I wonder whether this is something that this paragraph is really talking about, or whether it's something out a little bit different, and maybe it's more of like an applied instance of how politics go into these micro machines
Well,
in analysis specifically, and bureaucracy. I wonder whether it's exactly the same, or it's more of like applied politics through their
well,
lens.
you know what? Unrelatedly, I want to read the next paragraph. Unrelatedly, I'm just going to read the next paragraph. Sorry, I'm just going to do it. When Fromm denounces the existence of a psychoanalytic bureaucracy, he still doesn't go far enough, because he doesn't see what the stamp of this bureaucracy is, and that an appeal to the pre-Oedipal is not enough to escape this stamp. The pre-Oedipal, like the post-Oedipal, is still a way of bringing all of desiring production, the an-Oedipal, back to Oedipus. When Reich denounces the way in which psychoanalysis joins forces with social repression, he still does not go far enough, because he does not see that the tie linking psychoanalysis with capitalism is not merely ideological, that it is infinitely closer, infinitely tighter, and that psychoanalysis depends directly on an economic mechanism, whence its relations with money, through which the decoded flux of desire, as taken up in the axiomatic of capital, must necessarily be reduced to a familial field where the application of this axiomatic is carried out. Oedipus as the last word of capitalist consumption, sucking away at daddy mommy, being blocked and triangulated on the couch. So it's psychoanalysis, no less than the bureaucratic or military apparatus, is a mechanism for the absorption of surplus value. Nor is this true from the outside extrinsically. Rather, its very form, its finality, are marked by this social function. It is not the pervert, or even the autistic person who escapes psychoanalysis. The whole of psychoanalysis is an immense perversion, a drug, a radical break with reality, starting with the reality of desire. It is a narcissism, a monstrous autism, the characteristic autism and the intrinsic perversion of the machine of capital. At its most autistic, psychoanalysis is no longer measured against any reality. It no longer opens to any outside, but becomes itself the test of reality, the guarantor of its own test. Reality as the lack to which the inside and the outside, departure and arrival are reduced. Psychoanalysis index sui, with no other reference than itself or the analytic situation. So like I said, you kind of were setting me up.
I don't know why that the thing I experience in analysis and in sociology is being almost exactly described in these books. It feels strange.
I mean, that's got to be, that was genuinely, this is why I was like, what the fuck are you, did you read ahead? I was like, what the fuck
No,
are
I
you?
did not read ahead.
I know you didn't, but I'm just like, that's how it was. I'm just like wanting to scream. I just want to read you, but this is what they're talking about, that it's closer than that. It's not just saying a standoffish, well, look at this way that this works over here. It's like, no, imminently, the way it operates, how it runs, this is what it does. This is the thing. This is the deal. It's fucking crazy how very particular.
I'm going to throw out another question. I think that's more productive as after
this will be the last question, because then we're going to review this paragraph and go through it, and then we're going to be done for the day. Just letting everyone know.
So, regardless of, because I was indeed diagnosed as autistic, high functional autism, way before I was talking with this analyst. And then this analyst knows that I am autistic, right? I have the diagnosis, and I told her. And I'm just wondering, regardless whether my core or most important conflict is properly adipolized or not, properly organized or not. Does this have to do with whatever the deterritorialized flow or not? Because it seems like these flows and intensities does not matter to these analysts or cognitive behaviorists, because
Of course not.
whatever they think is, oh, if you start the right way, the right process, and the right end, or for the right purpose, then everything will go correctly, even if you do not know what correctly means before these things happen, right? So I wonder whether this is, it's almost as if they're describing a deterritorialized petite art.
They kind of are. And I want to be very particular when I say kind of, because it's when we talk about the deterritorialized petite, the little object of desire, we're talking about the reverse side of that coin, as they were talking about just 2 paragraphs ago, the way that desire is connecting, and that the little object that's kind of constantly there, this is sort of enmeshed, and that line that crosses. So like, just actually to go through the paragraph, because I think that'll help, because there's a lot of lines in here. But let's talk.
I'll say just a little bit more after.
No, go real quick, and then we're going to move forward.
One thing, I was having this conversation with another Lacanian analyst that voluntarily moved out of Los Angeles. First of all, the guarantor, this word, is actually used in the insurance industry. Right. And after the insurance industry started to introduce themselves voluntarily or involuntarily into psychoanalysis during the 80s, then it becomes a perfect third party for interference between the patient and the analyst. And then I think this actually forms a very big argument of whether psychoanalysis can be properly practiced in the United States or not. Because when I talk with more Lacanian schooled analysts, they usually are much more comfortable talking about this question than these traditional Freudian or even Kleinian analysts that does just completely ignore these economic realities, right? So I just want to put this out there. I think it's very related to whatever these few paragraphs we're talking about. Okay.
Yeah.
Keep going.
No. So just to kind of run through it, the opening with Fromm, the psychoanalytic bureaucracy. Fromm's big deal was like talking about things and trying to get around Oedipus by talking about things that exist pre-Oedipal. And that's a mistake also, by the way, people make with Deleuze and Guattari, that they're talking about, pre-Oedipal. By doing that, like that's their critique. Pre-Oedipal, like post-Oedipal, is still a way of bringing everything that is an-Oedipal back to Oedipus. This is why, if anyone's confused, why is Brooks doing these? That's not an elephant streams, because this is how Oedipus functions. This is how representation works. This is actually one of Deleuze's core critiques, is what we're trying to figure out in the that's not an elephant stream. This is why the Magritte, this is not a pipe thing, is referenced in the space of Foucault and Deleuze and Derrida, because for them, it's trying to get away from the idea of something being something or not being something. It's instead, it's trying to discover a different type of existence. And so for them, like having this thing that is pre-Oedipal or post-Oedipal, you're still trapped in that paradigm. You're still trapped in that system, that thing. And ultimately you forget and lose the an-Oedipal. Reich is effectively doing the same thing, because
so it sounds like you were more talking about almost like a set theory, right?
We are talking about set theory. Correct. We are talking about set theory. Not even kind of. Deleuze's, all of Anti-Oedipus is actually a math book, and it's calculus, and it's about set theory at its base, 100%. And I'm not joking when I say that. I'm joking a little bit.
Yeah. It's very interesting, because the way I practice abstract art is exactly the same thing. I used I use the forms to do set theory, but this is very strange. I just feel like it's very strange where the thing I experienced is exactly enumerated, explicitized in these books. But
yeah, they're good at that. They're good at that. It's weird. I've experienced the same thing you just went through, by the way. Like there's parts of this that I'm like, oh fuck. But to continue, Reich, who again, great writing, a lot of really great sort of people who followed on in a tradition of Reich. I've got a couple of books of like Reich's followers on, and their writing is exceptional because they're very big into that sort of thing about social repression and sexual repression, how they tie together. It's why Reich wrote about fascism so early, is he saw the sexual repression being the first thing, and kind of ran with that. And again, he correctly went, as they say here, that psychoanalysis actually helped this. It did in Germany, for goddamn sure. But the problem is that he didn't recognize the deeper connection of things. Because again, it's not just that psychoanalysis happens to be ideologically aligned. Oh, psychoanalysis wants to Oedipalize you and capitalism wants to Oedipalize you, therefore blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, it's not really that. It's the particular economic function capitalism has, the decoded flux of desire, liberated desire that doesn't have coding or isn't axiomatized and is sort of out and about, needs to be recontained. And that is the thing at the very base of what it's doing. And so when you start talking about psychoanalysis as an economic mechanism, which it is, it's labor performed that people pay for, and it's expensive as shit, and it's extremely specialized, but it also perverts a lot of things around the thing. It's not really to sort of talk about it as an ideological thing, but instead this economic mechanism that is ultimately about redirecting desire, redirecting the unorganized into the organized, that of the family unit. Family unit is managed, it's controlled. This is why we talk about people, as they say here, being blocked and triangulated on the couch, sucking away at daddy mommy, the so-its afterward that psychoanalysis teaches us to consider things, where we're able to, after the fact, magically, always somehow find a way to define everything in the exact way we need it to. It's incredible. That rewriting of things afterwards that we're doing, this is again part of that same thing. And this is why they make the line, and I really like it. It's not the pervert, and they don't mean that like someone who really likes sex. That's not what pervert means in this, or really at all. It's a whole other thing, psychoanalytic term. But the thing they're playing with here is saying that it's about actually psychoanalysis itself is the immense perversion. It is a drug, a break with reality, and it is breaking first with the reality of desire, the real of desire, the imminent, vital production of life is the first thing that psychoanalysis breaks from. And so that entire play ultimately is talking about psychoanalysis as becoming this narcissism and monstrous autism, which means exactly what it sounds like still today. Like they are being very particular here with the choice of words, and it's a clinical meaning of it, but it's this self-referential. Autism is about self. That's why autism, it's not, they don't make up words out of random letters. It means that it comes from this place of oneself, focused within oneself, not connecting outwards. Autism, automatism, the catatonism, these things that sort of play into that. An autistic person or a pervert isn't really who escapes reality, as you say, but psychoanalysis itself that helps escape from the reality of desire, which is fucking a lot. That's a lot to say, I think, but I like it. I dig it. But the self-referential nature of analytic theory always comes back to itself. The index sui means self-referencing. Psychoanalysis index sui, it only references itself. It has no other reference than itself or the analytic situation. And that's the crux of what they're saying is it is itself a perversion that's trying to encompass all of life, but it is this thing very particular. Here's how it works. Here's how it touches into the economic systems and desire and repression and social and all that. Sure. But you're not going deep enough. You're not going as deep as life itself. That is the first thing it steps away from. And that's, again, desire and production is life itself. It's the germinative. It's the productive. That's the thing they're driving at constantly throughout this book. And it's certainly strong here. Cryborn, thank you very much for the super chat, by the way. Great discussion. Thank you. We got lucky. LJ came in with a really good question. That's not don't expect that to happen every week. It's, not that LJ doesn't have good questions. Just, I don't think if I were writing this, I would have written a student to ask that, or a person here to ask a professor that exactly in between these paragraphs. It's crazy. Thank you very much, LJ, for interjecting, genuinely.
It's kind of even I love the pattiness, because psychoanalysis, it's very important, right? Because it's also touching upon the science of logic, right? Psychoanalysis is no longer the measured against any reality, right? It's kind of like a measure. Like we view psychoanalysis as a measure, but it's no longer a measure. It's we are indifferent to psychoanalysis as such, right? We reach a level of the essence of psychoanalysis where we are indifferent to it in historical time now, in the present now, right? So it's kind of like fascinating, right? That it is no longer the measure, you know? But what is the measure? What is the measure? That's the question. What is the measure of like that is desire?
Well,
right?
and that's why they use the term pervert here. And we were just talking a moment ago about sort of how Freud regarded homosexuality and other things. That's what perversion is. Perversion for Freud was that it's anything that is not the human ideality of sexuality was considered perversion. Now, over time, it's kind of shifted in Lacanian discourse. The pervert is someone who kind of subverts or perverts the norm and bends it back on itself with an awareness of it or an enjoyment that's able to be found there. That's an oversimplification, I know, but it's kind of that thing where it's, again, the pervert isn't someone who just sits around and jerks off. That's, they don't walk around in a trench coat. Those are perversions, but that's not what pervert means. Pervert is someone who plays around differently. And again, specifically isn't aimed at reproduction. That's what, for Freud, that was the big deal. Perversion is enjoyment of a thing that doesn't serve anything else. Good Lord. How would you do that? And that's why Deleuze gets into like Massoch and Seder Massoch, God damn it, in Venus and Furs and one sec. Two Regimes of Madness. Sorry, I have it behind me and I can never remember the fucking title. That side of things is perversion. And the flip that they're making, usually when you talk about these things, it's the analyst who's got the pervert on the couch and he's trying to fix him, and that he's the normal one, and that the pervert, the person on the couch who's like fucked up, is like, yeah, and I need to teach you. But it's the flip. It's saying, no, the perversion's actually in that divorcing, because again, the pervert for Freud was about that which stops reproduction, enjoyment that isn't about reproduction. For Deleuze and Guattari, there's no better example of that than the psychoanalyst who's stopping desire from connecting to desire and the reproductive connective process that is emergent and blocking it. The psychoanalysts are cock blocking desire and push and like, no, you want to be mommy, dad, we push you into this fucking funnel, and they are getting paid and enjoy that. So they're the perverts. They're the ones who are escaping reality, because they're not in connection with desire as it's being produced. They're the ones who have disorders of autism and others, but they're unable themselves to accept the real of desire itself. And that is the thing that they're going after. I really fucking like it a lot. Like, I really like the way that they invert it myself. It's very clever.
This is interesting. Yeah, it's like basically calling that the people that wants to diagnose other perverts are the biggest perverts of themselves, right? But I'm not sure if I understand that correctly. And I had some interesting interaction with the analyst that is trained under Lacanian perspective, but it's still very much a biggest perversion without realizing any of it. I think it's quite interesting because I thought that only happens to the Freudian and Lacanian, but someone that trained in South America and then still so much going into the sets of, what does it mean to dealing with the father and what does it mean to not deal with the father? They are very much unaware of any of these things. I found it quite fascinating because they went through a whole completion program of the licensure in the South American country. But am I understanding this correctly? The people that wants to diagnose every other pervert is the biggest pervert of themselves.
It's kind of the grand. What was the term they used? Sorry, the monstrous autist. I just like the phrasing.
What?
The monstrous autist. It is a narcissism, a monstrous autism that they say of psychoanalysis. Yeah, I mean that's kind of what they're going with it. that psychoanalysis is divorced from reproduction of desire. They're cock blocking desire. They're actually in the way, and they're getting paid and enjoy it, and they do enjoy it very much.
Yeah, I think this is actually, I think this actually points to something interesting about this really old thing when people started to study autism in the 70s, where when people go through the narcissism abuse, then they become autistic. They don't become a narcissist or an enabler of narcissist. They become autistic instead. So there's a third party there, and I think this reference.
Well, and this is when we talk about autism and schizophrenia, which is going to be a thing we're going to have to do the rest of this book. So I might as well do my thing now. I've oversimplified when I've said this before, but when we talk about schizophrenia here, we are not talking about like going schizo as people talk about today, or even the modern conception of schizophrenia as, people have dissociative identity disorder, or, all the different ways that the DSM sort of has this. At the time, and this is 1969 that they were writing this, so things were switching, but schizophrenia was actually a big umbrella term, and we could, and this is an oversimplification, but we kind of, as Guattari and them were working through it again, we've got multiple DSMs and fucking billions of hours of human time spent differentiating these things. But there was kind of two sides of schizophrenia as they're talking about it, and it had to do kind of when it hit. So there was like early onset and later onset, and it's kind of like adolescence versus teenagerdom, or youth, young and teenager-ish. I'm oversimplifying. If someone became schizophrenic, or they diagnosed someone as early onset schizophrenia, this was autism, as we call it today. This was automatism. It tended to yield the autist. People who are very young, who go down this path as they saw it, who are schizophrenic, they break off differently because they haven't hit the moment of socialization or other things that gives them the ability to become what we would call schizophrenic now, which was later onset schizophrenia. So they saw these two things as actually part of the same process based on when the break and when the switch happens. This is how they talked about it at the time. So when we have this big umbrella term and they're talking about the autistic, they are talking about the autistic we know today. Like that is the thing, like they're talking about the clinical version of it, not the LJ or Brooks version of it that's more functional. We're talking about the clinical version of autism often with them, which is like the guy who's in like personal nightmares of my own, ending up in the corner of a room that's rocking back and forth, mumbling 3 words to yourself over and over, that kind of thing. Or the catatonic patient who's unable to do anything, the autonomic patient who's tapping the wall 1,000 times and can't stop. That thing is the clinical entity of this. This to them was just, these people started earlier. They hit the schizophrenia thing earlier. That branched them out in this way. Whereas later they would be doing the, I am Napoleon, I am Jesus, the God's in my head. Judge Schreber's version, I have sun rays coming out my ass. I don't have a stomach today. I don't have a heart. Those things later in the process. This is the thing though for them. And I think it still fits. This is why I don't think it's worth tossing all of this out, because even as you break those things down, what we're seeing in CogSci is that they weren't wildly wrong. Because when we talk about when these things differentiate, when these things set up, it isn't that a person is born and they're set to have schizophrenia. It's not that they're set to have autism. It's not that they're set to be bulimic, or that they're set to be what we would say neurotic or normal, whatever the fuck that is. It's the nature of sort of how people grow over time. And when they hit certain points, they tend to break in certain ways. So when we talk about that process of how a person breaks, the way they're using it throughout the book is for us to understand the process with which forms a schizophrenic or an autistic person. This is the process with which all of us are formed. All of us. We're just very particular about how we sort of handle those people, what we consider norm and normative, and how we sort of box that in and what that box means. That thing that we're doing is what they're referring to here. And because that is the perversion of psychoanalysis or representational thinking, because the reality is none of us have a really stable identity, not of any semblance or meaning. There's a consistency of our own experience that we're able to have, but that thing isn't real. The autistic child who's like over married and overemphasizing that sort of consistency in themselves and doesn't connect, or the schizophrenic who overemphasizes how fluid that connection is. These are both indicative of how all of us exist. This is not that they're different and we're special and they don't have, oh, they're missing stuff and I have that thing. It's like, no, we're all developed. We're all made of our material conditions. So maybe like understand that all of us are, it's not that we're all a little schizo or a little autistic. It's instead that we're all the same stuff and it's surfacing in different ways through us. That's kind of more the jam.
I like the sentence, right? Psychoanalysis no less than bureaucratic or military apparatus, right? It's almost like fascinating because he described also not American politics, but I witnessed this phenomena actually, Brooks. That psychoanalysis is no less bureaucratic or military apparatus. It's a mechanism for the observation of surplus value. I witnessed that, Brooks, in Egypt. If you went to Egypt, right?
Mm-hmm.
You will see these shops, right, where they have TikTok accounts, what you call motivational speakers. By the way, you don't go to Egypt because I know the land there, but because they are our neighbor, but like don't go to Egypt because it's filled of bureaucracy, and if you say something about the government, they will jail you, right?
Yeah.
So anyway. Don't be like a lot of Americans went there and they got detained just for silly things. Anyway, but this sentence is actually what prescribed to Egyptian politics because it's actually the military apparatus also. Psychoanalysis is no less bureaucratic or military apparatus, and this is we have to have as a Deleuzian, right? I hope we are Deleuzian. We have to hammer this point, around, right? That it's like it's more than less military apparatus. It's a mechanism for observation of surplus value, right? And nor it's the true from the outside. The point is that the despotic using psychoanalysis for the benefit of keeping his power. Like when we talk about military institutions in Egypt, right? In Egypt, they encourage.
This is their critique. Their critique of Lacan is not that he was wrong. That's not like really what their jam is. Instead, they're like, hey, what you've noticed is actually how the despotic operated within its own sign systems and within the way that signification necessarily became about interpretation of the king or the big others, meaning the God's meaning in the Bible, the king's meaning of edict, whatever it is, all the way down. And that is still in effect in some ways because of the state apparatuses and because of the sort of latent nature of the state. But this is not bedrock of how people work. And that's their critique. And that's why, again, as they've said, they've pushed even further down. And they're like, when you get to this point for Lacan, he sees the other side is the real. What he doesn't get is that the real and desire are imminently intertwined and the desire is instantly producing it. Consciousness doesn't have the ability to grasp the real, but also consciousness exists down the road anyway. So why would it ever? So it's a different critique. And as far as being, and I'll end here, but as far as being Deleuzian, I would say I'm partial to it. Couldn't resist. Couldn't resist.
Yeah.
Partial. Partial, not partial. Just to be very specific in my French terms. Thank all of you for joining. I am going to be finishing out here. I know I'm sure everyone's got a billion things to say, but I am slowly collapsing, and it's because it's Saturday. I'm tired. I'm going to go do dad stuff and enjoy my day. I hope all of you are as well. Thank you for joining. If you like this, if you support this, if you want to support this, Super Chats membership's great. The Patreon is easily the best. Easily the best. Patreon.com/DGQC. If you want, we would like to have you join us here at the Quarantine Collective, discord.gg/DGQC. We have a lot of readings and we just sit here and we exist to help sort of talk through stuff. And we only have really happy, good conversations. about all of it. It's a very, very welcoming place. It's the reason I like it. What can I say? Enjoy, and we'll talk very much soon.